All right, everybody listening to the show today, thank you. Have a call-in guest today. We are honored to have him on the show. This is a surprise, but a big one and a good one. It is Alex Wright. You guys remember him from his WCW days, more prominently. Das Wonder Kid. And what a thrill to have you on today. Thank you for calling in.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, absolutely. So, growing up in Germany, what was your opinion of the American wrestling style? And when did you make your decision to leave for America and try it? Yeah, obviously, I know WCW had contacted you at some point, but what kind of decision was that to, kind of uproot your life and come to America and wrestle in front of American fans?
Well, first of all, I would like to say that my time in the States was one of my best times in my life. I mean, it was a really great experience, great country, great people, and I really miss the States, really. Can't wait to come back. But anyway, I'm a second-generation wrestler. So my dad, Stephen Wright, he wrestled very successfully internationally, 26 years all over the world. He wrestled for New Japan, for Stu Hart in Canada. He wrestled for Vern Gagne in the States. He wrestled in the big promotions in Mexico and also all of Europe. And he wrestled over here for CWA, which was the biggest wrestling company in Europe at that time. And he held many, many, many belts. And he trained me at a very, very young age. So I grew up on the road. I lived in the caravan or in the hotel right beside the building or beside the wrestling tent, and for me it was the best place to play was the wrestling ring. So for me, I never really decided that I'm gonna be a wrestler. I always knew I'm gonna be at one day I'm gonna be a wrestler. So I met at a very early age all kinds of pro wrestlers from all kind of nations, also from the States. I was like 8 years old when I met Scott Hall or Razor Ramon. I met Bull Power or Vader at a very young age, Terry Funk. I met a lot of New Japan guys at a very young age. So I was very familiar with all the different wrestling styles. And I watched almost every show of every wrestling show. I in front of the crowds where my dad wrestled or on TV. But TV started later on in Germany. I was about like 14, 15, and I said, "Hey, listen, one day I want to be over in that in that great country in the States, and would like to perform there on TV with all the great stars." That's what was my goal, and I always told my dad, "Hey, listen, one day I want to go to America," and he did everything to support me.
That's incredible. You mentioned Vern Gagne and Stu Hart. Those are incredible legends who really built professional wrestling in a lot of ways. I personally feel those two guys don't get nearly enough credit today, just because the lack of history involved with people researching. So that's incredible that you mentioned them. Thank you for doing that. I wanted to ask you too, speaking of big names, it's kind of funny because very early into your WCW career, they put you on their biggest pay-per-view of the year, Starrcade, and they have you beat a guy who went on to become Triple H, one of the biggest names, in wrestling history the last 30 plus years. So looking at that now, hindsight being 2020, what did it feel like for you at the time for you to come in and then give you such a big push and put you on a winning streak so quickly and really push you hard?
Well, as a young guy, you feel like you're on top of the world, of course. But now looking back, I think it would have been better if they would have pushed me a little bit slower, so I could adapt to everything. And there's in that business, there's a lot of jealousy coming very quickly if you get a push like that. So I rather would have had a smaller push, slow push. But it was great at that time. And, of course, I enjoyed working Sean Paul Levesque or Triple H. We started out almost at the same time in WCW, and he was a great worker. And, I really enjoyed it.
One of the bigger things, too, is when you're coming up in wrestling, a lot of guys have told me this, you need to rely on your veterans, whether it's ring savvy or maybe ring psychology, so on down the list. And one of the things, too, is putting over some of the younger guys, right? And early on, too, you fought a guy named, you wrestled a guy named Paul Roma, at Super Brawl, and it didn't really seem like he wanted to do business with you. Did that kind of catch you off guard a little bit, that somebody who had already been in the industry 20 years would be so unprofessional at that time?
Yeah, it caught me on guard. It was a surprise because we had it planned differently. But that's an old story, and actually, it wasn't against me. Actually, he was just pissed at the office, and that's the order. Of course, he should have had at least a good match with me and solved the problem with the office backstage. But well, that's how it was, and it was a big experience for me at that time. I learned of it, and the following years I handled myself differently in the ring afterwards. But the thing is, he was a great athlete, and when I had my first tryout match in WCW, that was in Germany, he was actually the first guy I wrestled here on the tour, and we had a really great match. And that was one of the reasons why Ric Flair, at that time the booker, he said, "Hey, listen, kid, do you want to continue the rest of the tour with us?" Because there was a other guy injured. And I said, of course, yes. And I was 18 years at that time. And that was the first step into WCW. And so I'm grateful and thankful that he had such a great match with me the first time. So I knew he could have had a good match on pay-per-view with me, but, that's just... Yeah, he didn't understand the business at that time, I guess.
Well, one of the things, when I look back on your career, and this is why we pushed so hard to have you on the show, because we're actually big fans of yours. I thought it was great, too, early on, and really the first couple of years, they had you wrestle against some pretty big names, and, I wanted to ask you, too, when we talk about guys like Arn Anderson or Diamond Dallas Page or Eddie Guerrero, what was it like sharing the ring with guys like that who respected the business and you really seem to have an incredible chemistry with? And, even going one step further, challenging a guy like Arn Anderson for a television title on a pay-per-view. What did that mean to you?
That means the world to me. I mean, Arn had such a big name in the business, such an experienced guy and such a great worker. So just being in the ring with him was just great. Every time I stepped with veterans in the ring, like Arn or Ric Flair or Eddie Guerrero or, all those guys, every time I stepped in the ring, I learned from it. And I really had fun. I mean, I was a young kid. At that time, I was, like you said, 20 years old. So just a great experience, and it was very easy working with those guys. I mean, like a walk in the park.
No, I mean, that's incredible, too. So, going in a little bit deeper into your career, and again, we want to thank you for taking the time to call us this morning. We truly appreciate it. And for fans out there, I mean, this is at the end of a long day for Mr. Wright. This is, he's calling from Germany, so for him, he could have just wrapped it up for the day, but instead he's given us a few minutes of his time. So we just want to put that on the record, how appreciative we are. Heading in, though...
Like I said before, American fans are the best fans in the world. That's it.
I love that. Thank you so much. Coming into about maybe 2 years in or so to WCW, they really went through a change. And, all of a sudden they're competing on Monday nights they have Monday Night Nitro, and that kind of came out of nowhere, again, very early into your time with them. And then eventually, Nitro grows to the point where they start bringing in some big names from the WWF. A guy that you mentioned earlier that you said you met when you were 8 years old, Scott Hall. So they bring in Scott Hall, they bring in Kevin Nash, they start the NWO. What did you feel about that at the time? Did you sense this was a good thing for the business, this quick expansion onto Monday nights, and then also such a heavy angle with NWO?
Well, I think the NWO angle was a great story. It wasn't good for me and for a lot of younger guys because they focused too much then on the big names. And I think that's one of the reasons for the downfall of WCW, because that was always the difference between WCW and WWE. WWE built their own stars, and WCW bought most of the time the stars. But they had so much incredible young talent in WCW. They should have pushed us more and have us more involved in the big stories, and then they would have secured the future of WCW. So for WCW to get more recognition and stuff, it was good to have big names like that and the storyline NWO. But for a lot of younger guys, it was just bad.
I agree. You know, as someone who's 41 years old, I look back at, you know, I was 16 at the time, 15, 16, going through high school, when that peak hit. And I even remember then thinking to myself, this is a short-term fix. They're taking some of the oldest guys on the roster with the biggest names, and I get all that. But at the same time, there's so much young talent. I would urge a lot of fans to go back and watch the pay-per-views and the Nitros in those mid-90s, because some of the best matches on the card were in the first hour. And you had guys like Eddie Guerrero and Chris Benoit and Alex Wright, and even a guy like Glacier. I mean, there were guys out there who were so talented that never really, in my humble opinion, as a fan only, just as a fan, never truly got the push that they deserved. So leading into 1997 was really that big peak there. And I have two questions for you. I've been wanting to ask you for a long time. You know, number one, you had a very short stint there as a heel where they worked you with Goldberg before they eventually flipped you to Berlin, and we'll get to that in a second. But, you know, it was kind of like, and I don't say this to be anything arrogant, so please don't take this the wrong way, but it was like they were building a feud with Goldberg and Steve Mongo McMichael, but all of a sudden they threw you in the mix for like a month. What kind of sense did you make out of that? Did you kind of feel like, hey, it's great that I'm on TV and they're still working me in angles? You even had the Cruiserweight title for a second there, you know, from Jericho and all that stuff going on. But, like, what did you feel about all that? Did you feel kind of like it was only a short-term fix, or did it give you hope that maybe you would get eventually a main event push?
Well, you know, like I said before, I'm a second-generation wrestler. Even also my uncle Bernard Wright was an internationally very successful wrestler, and also the trainer and the foster father of my dad, Mr. Ted Bedley. He was a promoter, wrestler, and owner of a wrestling school. He also trained the British Bulldogs. So I'm coming from one of the European wrestling families over here, and my dad always said, "Hey, listen, always be a pro, you know, and if the order is that, you do it. You know, always give your best. Always try to entertain the fans and give your best." And that's what I try to do, you know. And of course, in the business, a lot of stuff happens which personally I disliked, just stuff like you mentioned. But it's not about you're always taking the victory or having that belt or whatever. In my opinion, it's how you present yourself each and every time when you step in the ring, and always try your best to entertain the people and the fans. So you can lose a match, but in the hearts of the spectators and the fans, you're a winner. So you have to stand over that at some point. You know, if they pay you good money, so that's fine. Maybe next month it looks different.
One thing I wanted to ask you too, and we appreciate it as usual here, but wanted to keep the interview pretty much all about you. But I do have one question that it wasn't an angle that you personally were involved with, but you know, every time we have a guy on from WCW who wrestled during this time period, this is kind of our standard question I have to ask you. And we ask all our guests this who were part of WCW at the time. Starrcade 1997 was the biggest event in WCW history. We had an 18-month build of Sting coming in with the black and white Sting for the first time to defeat the quote-unquote evil Hulk Hogan. This was the ultimate good guy versus the ultimate bad guy. However, what seemed like an obvious finish where Sting would beat Hulk Hogan and everybody would get their happy ending didn't happen. It got all muddled up. They eventually had Sting win, but they had all you guys in the crowd as well. And I had talked to Glacier about this, Ray Lloyd, last week, and we had a really good conversation about this when he was on the show. Why do you feel number one, that they had put wrestlers in the crowd instead of whatever else, and number two, what were you thinking, and what was everybody thinking, backstage or whatnot, when Sting did not beat Hulk Hogan, cleanly to win the title and have everybody ride off into the sunset? It was such a screwed up finish. Did that surprise you that WCW kind of took that turn?
Well, at that time, a lot of stuff surprised me. So, well, who knows what the reasons were for that ending and for that finish. They could have been so many different reasons. I don't know. I wish Sting would have beaten him clean, but maybe Hogan had too much power. He didn't want to do it. Who knows? Or Sting thought, well, maybe let's continue the story in some sort. Down the road, I'm gonna pin him then clean or whatever. Who knows what they planned? I mean, WCW was kind of chaotic at that time. That's the reason why WCW ended that way he did.
The thing about it too is you were so popular, and the girls loved you, and even the guys loved you, right? And that's kind of the perfect mix. But eventually, they turned you a heel, you know what I mean? And then eventually they went even one step further down the road, and this was a couple years later. But when you became Berlin, whose idea was it for you to go full heel at that point, change your entire look, the name, all of it? I want to say, and I'm asking this question off of memory, so please forgive me if I'm wrong, but I want to say that they brought you out with a guy named The Wall, right? So they really went full tilt with this. Whose idea was it, and how did you feel about going full heel like that?
Okay, well, that's a little bit longer, that story. Since, I started out as a face in WCW, as a pretty boy image and stuff like that, and I was very young at that age, at that time. I started was 18, and in my mid-20s, you develop and you're getting older and you're a man, and at one time I said, hey, listen, I don't want to be that pretty boy anymore, So I decided to have that totally change of look and stuff like that. And my idea was to have that character as a vampire, old-fashioned vampire gothic style, But WCW took it to have it more the German guy, and stuff like that. Basically, I should have saved this idea for WWE, because at that time, there was all the change with Eric Bischoff leaving the company and Vince Russo coming in and stuff like that. So nobody really knew in what direction the booking goes and stuff like that. So basically, they dropped the ball with the whole gimmick. Because my debut with that gimmick, it got really a great response. It really worked as a really bad heel, and they could have went really far with it. But, just a lot of backstage politics, killed it off then, basically.
You mentioned WWE, and that's kind of where we're going to wrap this up. What do you feel was the biggest reason why you didn't go to the WWE after 2001 when they bought the company?
The biggest reason? Because I said no. No, seriously. I mean, when WCW was bought by WWE, I still had a 2-year contract, 2 years left on my contract with WCW. I was directly signed by Time Warner. And I really didn't like the offer WWE offered me to buy that contract out. Because at that time I was straight with WCW for I don't know how many years. And I was really on a lot of shows, and I did a lot of traveling, and I had a lot of injuries, and then there was the backstage politics, and I was just totally burned out and mentally burned out, and my body had to take a break. And so I decided to not take an offer, for the buyout. And I said to myself, I have to go back to my roots. I go back to Germany where all my family lives, and So I went back to Germany, and WWE contacted me twice afterwards. Then again, which I felt really honored and grateful for that. And but my how do you say, my opinion is, if you can't give 100% for the promoter, if you can't give 100% for the fans, and you can't give 100% for yourself, you should not step in the ring. And at that time, it was just the wrong time for me to go back in the ring. I really would like to wrestle for WWE. It's just a great company, and I really think I could have brought some different style to it in that company, having new ideas was my bowling gimmick and stuff like that. But it was just the wrong time for me, so I decided to say no. If you say twice no, they won't come again. Yeah. So if I wanted to go back, I would have to take actions. But I have a very good running wrestling school over here. I'm booked a year ahead, and they're fully booked. And a lot of my students are actually international wrestling all over the world. Best example is Fabian Eichner or Vinny Vici at WWE. He is a former student of mine. And I also have my own promotion, running shows over here in Germany. So, I always wanted to see in the States, wrestling is one of the 5 most popular sports, right? So in Germany, it's not that popular. So I always wanted to make sure I give something back to the sport, and I can help to secure the future of this great sport, wrestling. And that's why I opened my wrestling school and my promotion, So, but who knows? Maybe I come back. Like I said at the beginning of the interview, I'm really missing the States. And I get a lot of booking requests all the time, so maybe I take one sometime in the future.
Listen, man, Giovanni Vinci, all right? You can't say that name without smiling. Everybody loves him. Obviously coming out of the right stuff. Guys, listen, check out Alex Wright any way you can. The school is called The Right Stuff, located there in Nuremberg. If you heard a second ago, it's Giovanni Vinci, one of his most famous students to come out of there, wrestling with Imperium. I'm just going to throw it out there, fans. How great would it look for Alex Wright to come over here with Imperium, join that stable? I'm just saying, as an old school fan, that would just be too cool. We want to thank you again and wish you the best of luck, and we're going to send as many followers to follow you as possible. Sound good?
Sounds great. Thank you very much. Yes, Alex Wright.
I love it. Thank you again, sir. You have a great day.
You too.
Bye now. Alex Wright, and I'll say it one more time, Giovanni Vinci. Who doesn't love to say that name, right? Alex Wright, would be perfect with Imperium. For Keon Sports, you've been listening to the Wrestling with Legends podcast.